Hanna, I want to start with you. You are a Belarusian journalist working and living in exile in Lithuania. Your government considered you a threat. There is a warrant out for your arrest. Now, I feel like many people would be too intimidated to continue working, given that. Can you speak to what has kept you committed to still covering repression in Belarus?
Thank you very much. I'll start not with my story, but with the story of Herman Brothers. I find it both cynical and very symbolic that he was sentenced to 8 years today, a few hours ago, on the International Freedom Day. And many of you might remember this case of a civilian plane that was forced down by the regime in Minsk, and Roman was on that plane. But Roman is only one of the very many cases of journalists who were arrested, who were repressed. One of them is another case, an example of Katerina Andreeva. She's here, her face is here on my t-shirt. She was also sentenced to 8 years for high treason. And you see the repression in Belarus, I want you to look at that as a process. So at first, when we were still in Minsk, when we were covering the massive, unprecedented protest movement, with hundreds of thousands of people protesting outside against the dictator Lukashenko, the regime attacked us. We were beaten, we were even shot with rubber bullets. Next, the regime targeted us with arrests. So hundreds of cases of detentions of journalists in literally weeks and months. And the third stage, it was actually, back then, I was really scared of wearing my press vest, because in that case, I would become a target, so I preferred not to wear it.
And usually that's a way to protect yourself, but in this case, it made you a target.
Exactly. And then the regime attacked institutions. So now we have all major newsrooms that had to relocate. So in Belarus, you wouldn't be able to read like any national outlet because they're banned. So imagine like you wouldn't be able to read the Washington Post or any other outlets here because the regime would censor them. And despite the international outcry, despite sanctions, the regime feels emboldened, and that was not enough, and that's why today's sentence. But what keeps me going, I think, is exactly this. The case of my friend in jail, the case of many other journalists who are in jail. Another friend of mine, Igor Osik, from Radio for Europe, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And in jail, he is tortured, he's isolated from information, he attempted suicide twice to protest against these conditions in jail. Another really important reason is also what I mentioned, this censorship, because we want to reach those people inside the country, and that became a real challenge because of this propaganda, censorship, and so on. We have more than 3,000 websites, web pages banned by the regime, so imagine the scale. And this is really important, especially because of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which the regime in Belarus is part of, a co-aggressor. And we want to reach people and explain to them that this is what is happening.